You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 132, Guilt Before, During, or After a Breakup. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, my beautiful brave hearts. This is actually the very first episode I'm recording after getting engaged. I am so excited. It happened on February 20th, Sunday at brunch. It was beautiful, and I cannot wait to share it all with you. I will do an entire podcast episode about it, chit-chatting. It'll be a bonus episode, so don't worry. You're not going to miss out on the content that really matters. But for those of you who are interested, I was going to record a podcast episode for you. So excited to talk about it. But Today we're talking about guilt. So many of you are bringing this up. It came up inside of the Get Over Your Ex program. It has come up in a lot of Q&As that I've done, guest coaching experiences that I've participated in. Guilt seems to be something that keeps coming up, and I'm not a fan. I've never really seen it be useful in long-term scenarios, and I really want to talk about it. And now some of you, there's like a variety here, right? Some of you are feeling guilty for leaving a relationship, and maybe you're feeling guilty for staying in a relationship, or guilty for how you behaved inside of the relationship that may have led to the breakup in the first place. So I'm seeing guilt in all three of those areas, and I really want to cover it all with you because when I'm speaking to my clients about this, they very much feel like it is necessary. They very much feel like it's required, and it's interesting because we're handling it a lot differently than we would any other emotion. So let's just take a moment and look at what guilt is. So when I look up the definition on the amazing Googles, it says that guilt is feeling responsible or regretful for a perceived offense, real or imaginary. Now, what's fascinating to that for me is that it says perceived offense. So either you perceive an offense or the other person perceives an offense, which is all about perception, the lens that you're looking at all of the world through, aka your thoughts. And then they even go on to say comma, real or imaginary. So some of you are in a relationship and then not leaving the relationship and then feeling guilty about it. Some of you actually do leave the relationship and then feel guilty about the imaginary things that might happen to your ex if you leave, or may have already happened. So it's like real things and imaginary things we're perceiving as an offense, and then we feel responsible or regretful, aka guilty. Now, the other thing that the internet said about guilt, is that it can be a part of the grief reaction. And I thought that was really cool to just see and recognize and become aware of is, maybe when people are going through grief, it's just a natural part of that experience, and that's okay. Now, here's where I want to get into the nitty-gritty, and I want to come up with a tangible solution for you to release guilt. And before we talk about the tangible solution, I want to talk about why we want to release guilt in the first place. So most of my clients tell me they are feeling guilty, meaning it's an emotion that they are experiencing in their body. And what I'm noticing is twofold. Number one, they think that the guilt is just happening, that it's something that is there and there's nothing they can do about it. It's as if they're supposed to feel guilty because of XYZ. And secondly, when we look a little bit deeper, what I'm noticing is that as humans, when we experience guilt, we think that feeling is almost required. That if we feel guilty about something, it will lead us to fixing it. Or if we don't feel guilty about something, it makes us a bad person. If I don't feel guilty about leaving my relationship, then it makes me a bad person. Isn't that so wild? But what I see more often than not is that it just perpetuates depression and a lack of action towards a productive solution. Again, when we're feeling guilty, it's perpetuating these things, right? More often than not, when we are feeling guilty, remember, thoughts create feelings, feelings fuel action. What I see action-wise in the behavior line when we're feeling guilt is perpetuating depressive thought patterns, perpetuating a lack of action towards a productive solution, which then gives us more evidence to fuel the thoughts that are perpetuating the guilt in the first place. And we think that it does the opposite. If I feel guilty, I'll take a different action to show up in a better way and be a better human. When in reality, when I feel guilty, I show up guilty and it perpetuates the lack of the productive solution. I want you to really think about this. When you're feeling guilty, what do you do? From my clients and from myself, we wallow. We sulk, we worry, we complain, we talk about it, we go in circles in our mind. We find all the things that we don't have control over. We compensate, like overcompensate, right? We spin. We have more thoughts that lead to depression about being a bad person. There is significant negative self-talk and beating ourselves up when we feel guilty. Isn't that fascinating? Now I want you to take a moment and think about what do you do when you're not feel, or what do you not do when you're feeling guilty? So we talked about what we do, but what do we not do when we're feeling guilty? When I'm feeling guilty, I'm so busy doing all the other things in my brain that we just talked about that I'm not being kind to myself. I'm not having compassion for myself, which almost inhibits true compassion for others because you're too stuck in your head thinking about you. You're not identifying the real problem. You're not evaluating what happened and coming up with a good solution that doesn't involve changing the past. I'm going to say it again. You're not identifying the real problem, evaluating what happened, and coming up with a good solution that doesn't involve changing the past. You guys, that's so important. When we're feeling guilty, what we're doing is we're thinking about how can we change what's already happened versus recognizing and coming to acceptance of what already happened, loving yourself through that process, and then deciding how you want to show up differently in future events and not wallowing about what's already taken place. What? I want you to think about, I've been using this word productive solution. Maybe I should do an entire other episode on this because I'm seeing this a lot. Productive solution to me equates to a solution for things you do have control over. We do not have control over what already happened. As far as I know, up until this point right now, there is not a time machine that can send us back so we can redo it. So we don't have control over what already happened, but we do have control over how we handle the same situation in the future, what we do now, and what we do moving forward, and even what we could do to remedy the situation if need be. And here's the thing. I genuinely do think that guilt is a useful emotion in the short term. It allows us to check in with our values and our morals. Did I show up in a way that aligns with the version of myself that I want to be? Why or why not? What could I do differently? But long term, It's not useful because it can spiral you into so much negative self-talk and so much beating yourself up that it spirals into depression. And that's not useful when we're beating ourselves up through that process. We can check in with guilt. We can say, oh, I'm feeling guilty. I need to check in. Did I show up with my values and my morals? And if not, can I love myself through that process? Can I be kind to myself and show compassion for myself as if I would a child who stole a, candy out of a shop? When we take that guilt and we chew on it and we wallow in it and we just take a big old shower in it, it's not good. So the solution to releasing guilt is like any other emotion, my friends. Thoughts. The optional sentences we focus on in our brain is what creates our emotions. So there are thoughts that generate the feeling of guilt. Some of the thoughts that I'm seeing that generate feeling guilty for leaving is, I'm supposed to help during tough times. I can't be his friend. I promised to love him forever, and changing my mind means that I lied. My life is better than his. I'm better without him. He was trying. He may hurt himself. He lost me because I chose me. He doesn't have my support and love anymore. It's my responsibility to take on his burdens and help him. I'm a bad person. That's a really big one. I'm a bad person because if the roles were reversed, I wouldn't want this. He's going to spiral because I left him and it will be my fault. Those are all optional thoughts, stories that you have created in your mind and chosen to focus on, which creates guilt. Notice how many of them feel very like high and mighty, like this person can't make it without me. And I just want to question that. That person made it in life up until the point they met you without you. And maybe that's what's best for them, actually. I'm so glad that my ex-partner broke up with me. I thought even that I wouldn't make it without him. But what actually happened was I made a life that was so much better without him. And I'm so grateful that he released me from that. Now, there's also thoughts, right? We've talked about too, guilt's for all the things you did in the breakup or in the relationship that you think may have caused the breakup. So some of those optional thoughts and stories you might be telling yourself, it's my fault he broke up with me because of the things I did or didn't do. I didn't do enough of the right things, or I did too much of the wrong things. I said hurtful things to him. Even if some of those are seemingly true, it doesn't mean that you have to believe them. And it also doesn't mean that you have to lie to yourself. But the very first step to releasing the guilt is just noticing and becoming aware of the fact that the reason you feel guilty isn't because of the actions you took or what happened. It's because you're telling yourself an optional story that's generating that emotion. And once you realize you're experiencing guilt, here is what I want you to do. I want you to identify the neutral circumstance, the neutral event that is creating your guilt. You think it's a specific thing and it's not neutral, and that's totally fine. But we've got to recognize that all the things that happen outside of us are outside of us, and that is a neutral thing. Because I could do a whole podcast episode on this, and I teach this inside the Get Over Your Ex program. But we've got to recognize, what is the event that I'm blaming my guilt on? Because once we take our power back in recognizing that it's not the event, it's the story about the event that I'm making mean X, Y, and Z that is creating my guilt, that's where you have your power to be able to release it. So we first have to just at least identify what is that event or that neutral circumstance that is creating the guilt. What is it that you did or didn't do that you think is making you feel guilty? Number 2, we then have to understand, what are we making that event mean about me? What are the actual optional thoughts that I'm believing that are truly creating the guilt. It's not the event. It's what I'm thinking about the event that is making me feel guilty. So what are those optional thoughts? And they're optional because all thoughts are optional. And it's not a problem that they pop up and they appear, but it's a problem that we focus on them and then we make them our truth. The third thing you need to do is evaluate the event. So after you've identified what is the event or the specific thing that I'm blaming my guilt on, and what are my thoughts about myself or the event that I'm then taking and internalizing that's actually creating the guilt, I want you to set that aside and I want you to do an evaluation of the event or an evaluation of the situation. What went well? What didn't go well, and what would I do differently in the future? This is so important. And I do this in a number of ways inside of the Get Over Your Ex program, but when it came to guilt, there was a specific individual. She's an amazing Braveheart who decided to finally leave her relationship, and she felt so guilty, feeling like he had no one. And so we sat down and we did an evaluation around her leaving. Like, what went well in the breakup? What didn't go well in the breakup and afterwards? And what would you do differently in the future? And it's such a great way to, like I said, about neutral circumstances, it's a great way to neutralize the situation and really look at facts versus data. And once you've done that, it is so much easier to take the fourth step, which is questioning the optional thoughts that you are making the event mean about you. Question those optional thoughts that are actually making you feel guilty. And you can ask yourself, what is it costing me to continue believing this story that I'm a bad person? Who would I be without this belief? Is it true that I'm a bad person? Is someone always bad or always good? Begin to question that. And like I've said in many previous episodes, it's easier to do that with a coach, but you can absolutely do this on your own, and it's called self-coaching. And then step number 5, you've got to decide what is the result you now want and what is the result you want in the future. So in this specific situation where this woman left the relationship and she really just wanted what was best for her and what was best for her ex-partner. And what's best for her is also what's best for her ex-partner. So she wanted to be in a different kind of relationship. And she wanted to also know that she was a good person. So by believing I'm a bad person, is that getting you closer to that result? That's the step number 6, is asking yourself, what do I need to believe about the event to get closer to creating that result now and or in the future? Closer to the solution, closer to what I was talking about, productive action, a productive solution. When we're believing I'm a bad person, that's just making me spiral out. It's not getting me closer to the solution for the actual result that I want to create. So what do I need to believe? What do I need to feel? And how do I need to show up to get closer and closer to what I truly actually want? Now, the interesting part about this whole scenario, this specific individual, is we ended up later finding out that he had been dating someone new and he had someone the whole time. And it was such a great example of how much we actually make up in our own mind. How much bullshit we just feed our own mind when we have no idea. And by believing that he was alone and he didn't have anyone to support him through this breakup, it was only hurting her. It had zero effect on him. Zero. What? So good to see. Okay. Now, if you truly want help with this, if you're struggling to do this on your own, you absolutely can do this on your own. But if you are struggling and you do want help with this, I highly recommend signing up for the Get Over Your Ex program. That's where I teach these tools and I help you with your specific situations. And we have got a guilt workshop in there as well, which is super exciting. All right, my brave hearts. Guilt is an optional feeling based on your optional thoughts, useful short term, but not long-term, and you now have the exact steps to releasing guilt for yourself so that you can move forward and show up in a way that most aligns with the version of yourself that you want to be. Okay, I love you guys so much. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will talk to you next time. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.